year, and I think we wonder with just a little bit, when will enough be enough, right? As we always do. We won't complain yet, but let's rejoice that we have a dry place to meet and that we have each other to keep us warm and from falling into the river maybe. And we're here together in the presence of God. We're starting our July Sunday School series. We just finished June, our focus on poverty. And last Sunday we met at Camp Minnesota. And this Sunday we start our July Sunday School series the series is entitled Our Changing World. And we have different topics there. And in your bulletins and in your mailboxes you'll find the topics for the month. This is also a wonderful opportunity, as we did last month, of inviting people to join us on this in these conversations. So this morning we have with us people that are very familiar to us in our congregation. They own a business uptown here, Buhler Mortuary. They are the directors of Ott Funeral Homes. They have expanded quite a bit throughout our neighboring communities. And I've had the privilege of working with them since I was a student pastor at Hoffnungsau before the turn of the century. And but they said they've only been here 20 years, so you put those two phrases together. They've been here in our community for over 20 years, providing end-of-life services in terms of funeral direction and those sort of things. And one of the things that I found first of all, is that they are trustworthy to work with. I always say it doesn't feel like you're going to a used car salesman when you when you go there, which some places can, and at that point in your life you don't need that. But the other thing that we've found, and I've witnessed when I've sat with some of you as family and also with other families, is those that have plans in place and that have thought about their death. And I know you don't want to hear that this morning on a rainy day, but those of us who have thought about it and have planned faithfully, and we've set aside, we've been good stewards with what we know is reality, that moment comes and things are ready. It takes such a stress off of people. It actually provides some more meaningful space to celebrate what happened here, to think and to grieve properly without having to make all these other decisions. So we decided we would invite Randy and Joan Ott here to talk to us about what some of the options are, what are some of the things they've experienced as we think about the changing world, and all of us are changing towards this, our end of life. Let's do that. Before we invite them to speak, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this moment and this time. We thank you for the work of Randy and Joan in our community. We thank you that even within this topic, which isn't our favorite, you are victorious, and that you enter it, and we have the ability to leave as victors, as full victors of life. And so we pray that you open our ears to hear, open their mouths to speak, and we pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Let's welcome Randy and Joan to speak.
I want to thank you for having us today to speak about this topic of pre-planning a funeral service. So Joan and I do appreciate that opportunity. Why don't you hand me that booklet over there, hon? I want to kind of start with kind of some literature, some booklets that we have available. Sometimes it's easier for folks to write stuff down or have something in front of them, and we're going to leave a box out here in the hallway that has the stuff for you to take home. This is free. You take it home, you use it however you see fit. This is called a pre-planning guide, okay? And on the inside it has pages that apply to all of us, okay? So we fill out those pages, or you do, and then you keep this booklet. This booklet is for your children, whoever's taking care of services or end-of-life situations for you. It's for them to know what you want to have as far as what type of service, okay? So this booklet is what you need, and then once you fill out certain sections of it, we ask you to bring it to our funeral home, then we run copies and keep on file. That way, if the time comes when something happens to you, possibly suddenly or not, meaning the family can always call us and say, hey, is mom or dad or brother or sister, have they done any arrangements? And then we have this on file, okay? This isn't anything financial. This is just kind of what you want to have for your funeral service, okay? There's also going to be monument brochures. This is also part of pre-planning. Some folks like to go ahead and have their headstone or their tombstone put into the cemetery. So we're going to leave those brochures back there too. This is often done. People may not do this part so much, but they do this more often nowadays, okay? I want to talk about pre-planning, not only the pre-planning side of financial, but also the pre-planning of the emotional side. This booklet is good for that, meaning telling your family what you want to have. And then also have that conversation if you feel like it. And we always talk about having the conversation, not sitting everyone down and saying, I want to talk about my funeral, meaning doing it when their family is together, like at holidays or those kind of things. Softer times is what we talk about doing. Meaning, don't force the issue with your kids or parents, whoever you may be talking about, but have those one-liners, we call them. Mom, what would you like to have for what type of service? What cemetery, what church would you like to use? That's where this booklet comes in handy. You can write those things down when you do that one-liner with them. You're not forced to have this big conversation. As Wilmer commented earlier, if we do it over periods of time, sometimes it's a little easier and a little less emotional, okay? Also, we talk about, in today's world, it's changing a little bit. We're hearing more from families in the last 10 to 15 years when someone says to you, what type of service would you like to have? The first words that usually come out of everybody's mouth is, just put me in a pine box and that's good enough, okay? And that is what most of us think about, because we're not going to be there as the person for the funeral. We're going to be gone. But we need to keep in mind for the ones that are left behind what type of service they would need, okay? So when we make that statement, just put me in that pine box, think about your children, your brothers, your sisters, whoever may be left behind that might need to grieve, process that funeral service for you. So those words can be very strong, and we've experienced in our years of doing this, Joan and I have been doing this about 30 years, that when you make those statements, they tend to stick with the person, very much so. Meaning, an example was, we had a family not too long ago. The mother said to the 3 daughters, she said, I don't want any viewing. In her mind, that meant, I don't want any public type viewing. What happened was, the 2 daughters that lived here saw mom when she passed away. The daughter that lived on the East Coast, because she wanted to follow her mother's wishes, did not get to see her mother anymore. That isn't what the mother meant. She just meant, I don't want the public looking at me. It was a very stressful time for that one daughter who did not get to see her mother one more time. And this didn't have anything to do with cremation. This was a burial. It was just a closed casket type situation. So when we make those statements or we write those down, be very specific about what you're meaning when you say that. Because the funeral is to show respect for the person who's passed away, but it's also for the living who need to grieve that person, okay? And as I go along here today, you all pretty much know me, okay? I think everybody in this room knows me and Joan. Don't hesitate to ask questions, because I'm going to talk for a little while, then I'm going to open up for questions, because I'm not a big speaker, all right? Okay? Pre-planning a funeral service. Financially, and I've also talked about the emotional side just briefly, but financially, how pre-planning a funeral works is, you can pay for it ahead of time, and there's a couple of ways to fund it. And some of you in this room, I look around, have already done this. You can prepay the money and put it into the bank, CD at the bank, or we put it into what's called an insurance policy. We prefer the insurance policy at the funeral home because there's reasons why that it's a little bit better than the bank. Nothing wrong with the bank, it's secure at the bank too. But a couple of reasons why we put it into an insurance policy is it grows tax deferred, meaning you never have to pay tax on the interest, okay? And then also we do what's called a guarantee. With an insurance policy, once the contract is fully funded for whatever type of service you've picked out, we guarantee the services, the casket, and the vault. Meaning, not that they won't go up in price, they will, but the contract, the money inside the contract will take care of the inflation. If it does not take care of the inflation, then that's on me. I cover the difference. We don't guarantee what's called cash advances. Cash advances, guys, are the cemetery open and closing, flowers, pastor honorariums, organist, those type of things. We still put the money away because in today's world, Medicaid can become an issue, okay? Meaning we get in the nursing home, we kind of go through all of our funds, then this money is set aside for the use down the road for the funeral service. So those are the items of pre-funding a contract, okay? Some people like to come in and take care of everything. Some people just want to do partial pay, which all of this is allowed. It takes $500 to start a contract, and you can pay on it at any time, okay? And it doesn't have to be set up on payments. It can be just done at sporadic times, all right? Questions before I move on to the next topic? Any questions, guys? All right, let's talk about the different types of services. I'm sure you all probably know of different types, but I want to kind of walk through those with you. There's the traditional type of service where we use casket, do viewing, and do burial. Then there's the graveside service where we just have a service at the graveside. We have visitation. And in today's world, cremation is becoming more popular. So we have 3 types of cremation services now. Cremation with no services at all, which I kind of touched on that earlier. When you're talking with your families or you're taking care of a loved one you're the one in charge of that type of stuff, be careful with the direct cremation is what we call that service, meaning there's no viewing, there's no services of any kind. That is one that we're seeing a lot of struggle with when families do that, meaning the person they're taking care of has passed away. They've said to their children, I don't want any services and I don't want any viewing. They have forgotten who the funeral is for, meaning it's for their children. The children are starting to change that aspect. We're seeing more of that. They'll come in and they'll say, Mom or Dad didn't want anything, but we are going to still do the cremation, but we're going to have a memorial service down at the church or at the funeral home, Randy, because they need that. Okay, that's one type of cremation service. The next type is cremation with memorial service. That means there is no viewing, but we still go ahead and have a service at the church and so forth. And the third type of service is becoming way more popular. We did, I think, 2 of those services last week in our funeral homes. Cremation with viewing, where we use a rental casket or a cremation type casket. We do everything the same way as traditional, but we just don't do the burial of the casket. After the service is over with, we do the cremation, and then usually the families bury the ashes somewhere, be it cemetery or wherever they choose to do that. That's becoming much more popular with the families who do choose cremation because it gives them the opportunity to see that person one more time, okay? Nothing wrong with any of these type of services. It's just critical to have the conversation with your families about that viewing or the non-viewing, okay? Yes, go right ahead.
So in that third option that you chose then, what is you're going to have an additional amount of work to do there.
Mm-hmm.
You're preparing.
Yes, you're doing everything the same way, Randy, as we would do on a traditional type service. The only, if you're talking about cost, is that what you're kind of leaning towards to some degree? Cost-wise, you're saving somewhat on the casket, and then also your cemetery expenses. The vault, outer container, that type of thing. Now, some cemeteries do require an outer container for cremains or for ashes, but it's a much smaller container, plus the cost is less, and so is usually digging the grave. So in relative terms around the Buhler area, you would probably be saving around $1,500 or so, okay? Because still people put up a headstone. We set a headstone last week. Neither one of the people are going to be buried. Their ashes are going to be scattered in Colorado. But they've lived here all their life and they want to go ahead and put a headstone up, so the kids have somewhere to go to, okay? So they go ahead and do that.
What's the option then if you just want to be cremated before that and maybe just have an urn there at the viewing, stuff like that? What is the time frame on that?
From the time we pick the person up to the time we can get the cremains back, is that what you're talking about? How many days?
How long does the family have, let's say you're sick and you die and somebody can't get there right away?
Oh, you're talking about the viewing part. If it's going to be more than, say, 4 or 5 hours, we tend to go ahead and do the embalming process. Because guys, keep in mind, we're human beings, and we're just like everything else God makes. Our body changes very rapidly once we pass away. So within 3 to 4 hours, usually, we try to do the embalming process, and then we have days. Then we can wait days for the viewing time to happen. We took care of a couple of folks last year, I can remember. We held both of those ladies over 30 days. When I say held them, they were perfectly viewable for over a month. That's a perfect circumstance, though. That doesn't always happen. But in those cases, the families just could not, I'd put it this way, the families just couldn't get their act together, meaning they just couldn't get back together and get here to Buhler, when they needed to. So we waited till actually Christmas was when they did one service. Okay? Does that answer the question? Yep. I don't remember circumstances with your folks. Right. How many hours went by, Candy? Do you remember? 6. Yeah. And in most cases, you know, that's fine. Sometimes even 8 hours, you know, can go by. But like I say, we like to do things pretty rapidly if we can. You know what I mean? So, any other questions? Anything about? Go ahead, Charlie. DNA is still alive in cremains. They can retrieve DNA from cremains. As far as what you're saying, that's kind of reaching out of my knowledge zone. And that happens. They're going to get her cremains. They're going to get her ashes. Yeah. Probably not, because they're going to get so scattered out. But that's really out of my realm on that one. But yeah, I've got a couple folks here in town. They buried some ashes in their backyard, and then they went and got a VA headstone and put the headstone there. And with our encouragement not to do it, they went ahead and did it anyway. Because when that house is sold or one of them passes, that will more than likely get disposed of. And that's unfortunate. We always need to keep in mind that we should stay with our cemeteries. Whatever you're going to do is headstones and those type of things, keep them in your cemeteries because they're always going to be maintained. And it's a nice thought to put Grandpa out onto the family farm. Great thought. But usually about one generation away, that family farm is now somebody else's family farm. And we had a circumstance out at Huffington not too long ago where the little cemetery, there was about 6 burials that were placed there, and it was 2 generations. Then it got sold to someone else, and unfortunately he farmed right over the top of the cemetery and set the little headstones off to one side and farmed right over the top of it. No one was maintaining the cemetery. It wasn't his fault necessarily, but it was one of those circumstances where no one maintaining, the person now farming the ground is not interested in maintaining that, so therefore it gets kind of lost in the shuffle. And we've got a circumstance here at the edge of town, the little Thiessen Cemetery. That's getting where, you know, family's not around to take care of it, so it becomes friends that have to maintain those cemeteries. So stay with your community cemeteries or your church ones that are going to be maintained, and then you never have to worry about grandma's headstone being laid up against a fence row somewhere, because that does happen occasionally. Yes, ma'am. You are correct. The large bones of the body do not, which is the femorals, like on a man my size, the leg bones, and probably the arms. The cremation process is not a pretty one. We don't encourage people to watch it because it is not pretty, but those bones do have to be ground up. And that's mainly what you see with cremains, is the bones that are ground up. Most of the rest of the body is in the retort, okay? Any other questions? Joan, help me out a little bit. Yeah. Any questions about funding and contracts? Okay, go ahead. Any age is fine to do it. We tend to see in our people, they'll procrastinate because it's not a fun topic to talk about. It's really not. But in the 60s on up, we highly recommend it. For reasons of financial, first of all, while we're still earning some revenue, it does help to fund the contract. And you can have a funeral service cost-wise anywhere from $2,500 up to around $12,000 is kind of what the range runs for a funeral service. Meaning the direct cremation, obviously the least expensive, traditional, depending on what you pick out, cost and cemeteries. But in the 60s is when we kind of recommend, and then above from there. With Medicaid being an issue in our world nowadays, not just with nursing home and all that, and I'm not talking down about a nursing home because our nursing homes do a fantastic job, but when you're spending $6,000 to $8,000 a month with full care in a nursing home, it can go through your funds pretty quickly, even if you have long-term care. So it's not a bad idea to go ahead and set that money aside. The money stays there too. I want to stress that. It's not the funeral home's money. If Randy and Joan aren't here anymore, if Buhler Mortuary doesn't exist anymore, it's still under the person's name, irrevocably signed to the funeral home, so it stays in their name under their Social Security number. It can't be touched. It has to stay there for the use of the funeral service, but it's just a good idea. And once again, I stress, you don't have to put it all away at one time. I have families that'll do $500. I've got a little lady who sends me $50 a month, so it's not one of those things where it requires you to do it all at one time. Yes, sir.
Has there been some escalation in costs for cremation?
Yes. Why? Why is that? Well, first of all, the paperwork has grown a little bit. We're required to do a little more paperwork than we used to do. We used to have a 1-paragraph form that the family signs. Now we have a 2-page document that they have a release form. Also, the coroner's permit now costs a fee. In every cremation, a coroner has to sign the permit before the cremation can take place. The next is just because of the increased amount of cremations. Our crematories now are charging more for the actual process of the cremation. Plus, to be honest with you, funeral homes have determined that we weren't charging enough for what we were doing. We were, so to speak, giving stuff away. And so that has changed a little bit. Our cremation families are now bearing the burden of the costs that we were tending to give away 10 years ago. So we were leaning that money back over to traditionals and letting the cremation families kind of get away with not having to pay quite so much. So we're balancing that back out to where the cremation families got to take care of that.
How long do you think there's going to be a smoothing out of those charges, or is there going to be a continuing escalation?
Not continuing escalation. I don't think that. I'm not talking about a drastic amount of dollars, but it will, as inflation goes up, it'll trend up with that. Because there's funeral homes now that are charging their professional service fee plus other items that we didn't charge for. So I think it's going to level out in the next 5 years, but it's not going to be, sure, you're going to have some places that are always going to be that, we call it the hook. They'll charge you $500, or they'll put an ad in the paper and say it's $500 for cremation. That's a hook, folks. That's something that just gets you in the door, and then after that, then there's all these other fees that go along with that. But I think you're going to see cremation in that anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000, depending on what type of service it is, and that'll hold for us for at least the next 5 years. And keep in mind, it's not only just the funeral home that we're talking about. There's those cash advance items that go along with it. I had a family the other day, they spent over $1,000 on flowers. That's a cash advance item. As far as they paid the pastor, $200, paid the organist, $100. Death certificates, they needed 10, and there's $150. So there's a lot of items, what I'm trying to stress here, that go along with the funeral service that don't have a thing to do with the funeral home as far as the revenue, but they do need to be set aside in these trusts to cover those type of things.
When you cremate, when you put them in the grave, does it require the same space, or can you put them together?
Most cemeteries will let you put 2 cremains on 1 grave space. Like here in Buhler, Yoder, Haven, any of those cemeteries will let you put 2 cremains. No more than that, though. And the reason being is for the headstone. We don't want 4 cremains on a spot and then we can't get our headstone on there. So they don't want, that staggered effect. Cemeteries do require that outer container that I did mention earlier. Not all, but some do now. Buhler does, Haven does, North Inman does. They're starting to require those containers. Country cemeteries, most of them do not yet.
Is there any limitation on the number of names you can put on one headstone?
No, there's not. Size dictates that, though. Meaning how big the stone is itself, the face of it, that dictates how many names you can get on it.
What type of arrangements and costs and things are involved if you choose to give your body?
Good question. She's talking about donation to science, will your body to science. The costs depend on the type of service that you have with that, okay? Just where a person donates their body to science and there is no service, like a memorial service, you're looking at somewhere around that $1,500 because the KU, let's just use KU Med Center as an example, they take care of the cremation, but you still have to pay the funeral home to transport the person to KU. And then also, if there's any paperwork that has to be done here, which we usually file a death certificate, Social Security, and coroner's permit here. So time you get those items in, it's usually right around $1,500. Now, if you're gonna have a memorial service, then we start throwing all that other stuff in with the pastors, the flowers, the organist, meal, all that kind of stuff afterwards. And that can usually range, in that $3,000 range by the time we get everything done with the cash advances, okay? Donation to science is a very good thing to be aware of. It's a good thing to do with your body if you so choose to. Just be aware when you do it, KU is not doing as many as they used to. Just like my daughter, she went through med school, just finished up. They don't do as much study of the body as they used to physically, okay? And KU is an example, not that they're bad, they're fantastic, but they're getting more picky about who they accept. Meaning if we're a little overweight or a particular disease caused our death, they won't accept us. Now, right now, when we're healthy and we donate, then that's great. But they're getting just a little more picky on who they do accept.
And there is a warning. I know you and I've had this talk before about where you donate your body to.
Right. Yeah, there is. You're talking about the ones who do the wrong thing with us? Yeah. There's a couple outfits out there, what Candy's talking about, that you can go online, and I can't remember the name of the one. I took care of one person that we actually flew that person to Arizona. The outfit actually says, you donate to us and we take care of all your funeral expenses. What they do is they actually sell off your body to some degree. And what that is I don't know all the particulars, but I do know that that's maintained through this company. That's why they do all the free stuff for you. Now, they're not quite totally upfront with what they tell the people they're gonna do. So it's kind of one of those things, beware. We just tell you, if you're gonna do donation to science, KU, reputable, they'll do a great job. They're not gonna do anything underhanded. So stay local is what we're talking about here. Any other questions?
What kind of trend are you seeing in services when you do? You see probably all kinds of deals. When we're talking about traditional, non-traditional, what's going on out in the world of funeral services?
As far as you mean different things, Randy? Yeah, well, Randy's bringing up what actually happens in a service. Help me, Joan, think of a couple of things that are different, but examples of what people do. They're getting more to where they start thinking outside the box. When I started in the business 30 years ago, we did a certain way. We called it cookie cutter. It was this way, and that's the way we did it every time. It's not that way anymore. It's not that way. We got families who, want to be part of, and they want to come in and do mom's hair. They want to come in and do the makeup. They actually want to come in and dress her or him, where you wouldn't have seen that 15 years ago. That wouldn't have happened. We're seeing a little more of the non-traditional as far as it'll be a traditional service, but don't need to have a pastor there anymore. We won't go to the church, we'll go out to the house. Don't need the funeral home. Randy, you prepare. You bring the casket in person to me. I'll take care of it from that point. Wouldn't have seen that 10 years ago. So those are becoming things that are a little bit different. Nothing wrong with them. Nothing wrong with those things at all. But it is becoming more of a somewhat do-it-yourself, if you so choose to do it yourself, okay? And not all aspects, because we're here to help you through whatever aspect you need, what level you need, and then we step away. But we are seeing that a little bit in our funerals.
I mean, when you give me that book and I fill it out, I say music choices and I choose to play Queen or
Exactly.
that'd be okay, or?
It'd be perfectly fine. We always just say, if you're going to have a church service, because that's where this type of thing comes in at, sometimes you have to clear things with your church and with your pastor before you're going to play certain songs.
Queen is okay.
Queen's all right, exactly. But the non-traditional is very, very, it's personalizing it. is what they're trying to do. We even have caskets that are personalized, and we can do certain things on those caskets, and urns that we do personalization. So it's becoming more a trending to get it more personalized. To have meaning, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and to have value. And if we don't do that, then that kind of takes that away. And where some of us are perfectly fine with, you know, we put God in there, we have a traditional type service, that's sufficient. Some of us are not that way, so we have to mix that up a little bit. We put God in too, but we also throw ZZ Top in there too.
The service is for the family.
It is, 100%.
And my thought is, yes, there's grieving and there needs to be that process, but on the other hand, I want it to be a celebration. I want people to laugh and have a good time.
Exactly.
You know, I don't want this.
You don't want to be too maudlin, too depressed. But we must keep in mind with that, though, too. We still have to grieve. And everybody grieves in a different way, too, by the way. We don't want to just think that this person's not grieving if they're laughing. They are grieving. It's just another way to approach that. But don't let those folks that need to cry or need to have that time, let them have that time, too. We got to open it up. What I'm trying to say is let's don't pigeonhole and say, hey, this is what I want. When I started out the conversation, when I said, just don't throw me in a pine box and we're all done. Don't pigeonhole your family into those type of things. Let them open this thing up. Okay? Go ahead, Don.
What happens if, say, I fill out that book and review the information, and then, I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but the family decides they don't want to do it the way I wanted it done. What do you do in a situation like that?
We lean them very heavily to do what you've recommended, okay? Legally, if you're talking about forcing them to do something, which we have that occasionally, most of the time we don't. And Don, just so you know, 99% of the time, unless it's what I talked about earlier, the family will follow your wishes, 99% of the time. That's why it's so critical to make sure your wishes are gonna help them, okay? Not be negative towards them. But most of the time what families will change is possibly a song or something like that. They don't change the big stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. I would, but I throw in a misnomer with them. I always throw this in because we do have the types of cremation services. We got 3 of them. I always say to the family, if you need to view one more time before we do cremation, that would be okay. Are you okay with that, though? Right now, just sitting here, was that something that would bother you? If your family saw you one more time before the cremation process, you'd be okay with that. And see, most people are. Most people understand that the family may need to see. We live on all sides of the country and the world nowadays. So we're not all just sitting right here in Buhler. Grandpa passes away, granddaughter, grandson needs to see them one more time. A photo on the cell phone doesn't do that. It just doesn't quite do that. And we're having more of that too. And you'd be amazed. There's an oddity. You wanted one? Had a family the other day. Grandpa passed away. Took a snapshot of him on the cell phone when he was in the bed at the nursing home, and that was her final view. After that, we took him from the home and we had the cremation process. I thought extremely cold, but that's what they wanted. And so we made that happen. But different ways of doing things, But yes, we do follow the wishes of the deceased, but families will change things up. They will just a little bit, if they need that process.
When my mother passed away, she had written down just in a notebook what she had done for her services, and we appreciated that, to no end. But the people that she'd written down as pallbearers, about 3/4 of them.
Dead? They passed away, yeah.
Is there a way of updating?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where she may not do it, but we have people that they look at this book every year, especially when they get older, and they'll update that book. But they're the ones who really have to do that. Or you as a child have to say, Mom, or let's take a look at that, see where we're at. Because yes, pallbearers get sick, pastors move on, she wanted Pastor Wilmer to do the service. Well, shoot, he's moved on 15, 20 years ago. He's not there anymore. So we do bring pastors back. That's a big thing. Some pastors will come back. But like I say, it's one of those things that changes. It does. Organists, if we got an organist that they want, we definitely want to have Renetta do our service for us, or Sarah. But they're not here anymore, that type of thing. They've moved to Florida on for vacation or something like that. But we've got to update those books and keep those things going. Nothing that's major. Those things usually take care of themselves pretty quickly once the service starts, or process of the service. Any other questions? No odd ones in today's world, buddy. Tip. We seem to have a lot of vandalism nowadays. Yeah.
But I was wondering, do they make or offer any kind of insurance policies or something to maintain that?
Well, the theft process, meaning talk about the vandalism and stealing, because we're having more of that. They're stealing the vases, which are made out of bronze, which are easy to be removed. Take a side cutters and you can cut the chain and move it. They're stealing that for money. The other thefts, we had one the other day in one of our cemeteries, Canton. They stole some little figurines that the grandchildren had put on the headstone. That's not for money, that's just because they wanted the figurines. But that stuff would be covered possibly under your homeowners, possibly. You have to check with your homeowner's insurance, and that's where you would either get it put on there or it may already be there. That's a little different there. If the grave digger, or say the cemetery, and when they're mowing, if they damage the stone or foundation, then they have to fix that. And they carry insurance to do that, by the way. Most of them do. Most grave diggers I have insurance to cover that. The leveling or the uneven of the stone, just natural settling, that's up to the family to have to fix that. You have to call a guy like me, he calls the monument people, our people, they come in and they level that, okay? And depending on the size of the stone and that type of thing, costs vary. But anywhere from $100 to $500 usually can get a stone leveled and put a new foundation underneath it. The $500 is the bigger stones. The smaller stones, $100, $200 gets those fixed. No, when you put a stone in a cemetery or a headstone into a cemetery, it is yours. So there is no insurance on that to my knowledge. Once again, I'd go back to the homeowners. You could put a rider on the homeowner's insurance. I've been told that'll cover those kind of things. But the natural settling of the stone, that is something that you're not going to have insurance cover at all. Now, if it's broken, then yes. But whoever broke it should be the one that's paying to fix it. Exactly. Then you're on your own because you're never going to know who did that. Yes, sir.
Just to address Greg's thing, our insurance covers the vandalism or the small deductible. A while back in our policy.
Good.
With the Hebrew endowment fund being large enough, I don't know if it was 5 to 8 years ago, we paid somebody to come in and level a lot of that stuff. So the cemetery, the Hebrew cemetery endowment fund actually took care of leveling of the headstones, and we were Mennonite church insurance policy covers vandalism, or at least the replacement cost.
Did everybody hear that? Everybody hear that? Okay. Has that been that long ago, John, we did that? Out at Hebron? Yeah. Has it been that long? Boy, time gets away. Our guys took care of that with John. He got lined up with our guys to level those stones out there. And we do that for a lot of cemeteries. We just completed a big project up at Inman. And Huffman Sow, we're going to probably be working on theirs here in the near future. So, yep. Any other questions, folks? Don't hesitate to call us. Our cards, oh, go ahead, Josh. Know him very well.
Of course. Sometimes him and I talk, and I think I've asked him, but he wasn't too sure. But is it legal or unlegal, or however you want to say it? And could you do it, be able to put 2 caskets in one spot? I mean, like one on top of the other?
Yeah, what Josh is...
Anyone has requested it too?
Yeah, what Josh is talking about is called stacking. It's where you put one casket deeper and then another casket on top of it. Cemeteries do this to save space. We do have a couple around here that do it. Yoder, as you folks know, certain sections of Yoder Cemetery we stack. And then also at Fairlawn, they do what's called stacking. It's not a major thing out here. We got plenty of space in all of our country cemeteries and our city cemeteries. But some folks do that usually in the bigger city cemeteries. They do it to save space so they can sell more spaces. That's why they do that, because they are restricted in your bigger towns. Not that Hutch is a big town, but to save that space so they generate more revenue. It's a very simple process is why they do it. Yoder, I have no idea why we started doing that down there. I have none whatsoever. We have got so much acreage, and we just opened up to the south more acreage to do burials. So I'm not for sure why that got going. I think maybe when they didn't have that ground, maybe behind there, they were concerned they were going to run out of space and not be able to get that ground that was next to the cemetery, so they did some stacking. We don't encourage that. It is a headache. It does cost more too, because the grave digger charges more. He has to come in and dig, of course, the deeper grave to place, and then we usually stack the vaults at the same time, and then you have to come back and redig the grave once the second person passes away. And it's a headache, and it does cost more to do it. So it's one of those things where bigger city cemeteries, yes, out here in the country, it's not necessary. I would do the regular side by side and not the stack. Because like I say, just the cost efficiency of it, it costs more to do the stacking. It does.
That's what I was wondering. You know, I've helped
Sure,
backfill.
sure.
And, you know, I've noticed it's just easier to do it that way
Yep.
rather than, stack.
Let's do the stacking.
But I wanted to hear from you.
Sure, you bet, you bet, you bet. Anything else, guys? Before we wrap it up? Yes? Depends on the cemetery. There's no state law. What she's asking, what was the requirements for vaults? There is no state law. So many people think there's a law that you have to use what's called an outer container or vault at the cemetery. There is none. It's the policy of each cemetery. Some cemeteries require it, other cemeteries do not. Most do require an outer container. They don't care if you buy one that seals or doesn't seal, they just want the outer container. The reason being is for maintenance. If you bury just the casket, it sinks, continues to sink until that casket gets completely flat. And that may take 1 year, 2 years, who knows how long. Once the grave settles over a concrete outer container, then it's done settling, usually about within 6 months. So that cemetery then doesn't have to keep maintaining that grave. But it depends on the cemetery. Like Buhler, Hebron, they require outer container, North Inman. Anything in your bigger towns like Hutchinson, Wichita are going to require outer containers. Once again, they don't care which one you use, but the minimum, the starting concrete non-sealer, they do require, okay? The sealing factor is a peace of mind. I guess I should run through that with you. Buying a sealing vault, which keeps the elements out away from the casket, and we know this to be true because we have had to move, over the 30 years doing this, I've had to move people, which you would think, why would you ever move someone? I've moved them for the stupidest reasons in the world, I gotta tell you. But anyway, one of them was, I gotta share this with you. We buried his dad, and this is back in Illinois where I came from. We buried his dad, I don't know, he'd been buried for probably 30 years in a vault. And he was on the side of a hill. And they didn't want to have to walk up that hill anymore to go to the grave. So we moved Dad from the side of the hill down to the flat part of the cemetery. I'm not kidding you. And it was strictly because they didn't want to walk up that hill anymore. Hey, I understand it. I'm getting older too. I don't want to have to walk up those hills either. But I thought that was a pretty stupid reason. But anyway, the sealing factor, jumping back to that right quick, is just a peace of mind thing, guys. It means some people don't want to think about, like last night, when it's raining 4 and 5 inches, that the water is getting into Mom or Dad's casket, so they buy a sealer. Some people say, no, we don't care about that. We know they're not there anyway, so that doesn't make any difference. So that's why people buy something that seals as opposed to something that doesn't seal. And you just have to weigh that just for yourselves. Okay. Anything else, guys? Once again, we appreciate you having us. Do not hesitate to call us. Most all of you guys know us here, have worked with us, and we appreciate you as a church and as friends, just so you know that. And do not hesitate to stop by, call us anytime about anything. We're available 24/7, and just let us know if you need anything, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I don't know if you'll be around in the hallway. We have a little bit of time. Talk to them in person. We'll start worship at 10:30. Next Sunday is yet to be announced. We had some scheduling stuff. Louise. Okay, so we do have something coming up, and it's on the topic of mental health, and one of our local students is going to present a presentation, a Buhler High School student, a presentation that she gave before. So be there for that next week, and we'll give you more information over our internet wires and Facebook page too once we get that nailed down. So let's gather for worship at 10:30.
Guys, we'll leave these booklets back here in the hallway. I'll pick them up till next week.
Yep. So the booklets will be out in the hallway.